PayPal co-founder Peter Thiel became a New Zealand citizen after spending just 12 days in the country. 12 days. The usual route required 1,350 days over 5 years. Then came reports that Thiel had bought a 477-acre property near Wanaka on New Zealand's South Island. Then came the plans for a bunker-like lodge there. And the story stopped looking like one billionaire's eccentricity and started looking like something else. A clue. Because when some of the richest people on Earth start preparing for the end, they do not all choose the same map. Some build in the United States, some look elsewhere. But in the imagination of elite survivalism, New Zealand began to pull with unusual force, and Australia too, though in a different way. By then, Thiel was no longer the whole story. Bloomberg reported that several Silicon Valley entrepreneurs had bought bunkers and placed them in New Zealand. New Zealand's public broadcaster described South Island bolt holes as apocalypse insurance, and quoted the line that changed the mood of the whole inquiry: New Zealand itself is the bunker. That was the point where this stopped feeling theatrical, because the data gave the map more logic than I wanted it to have. Risk models really do put Australia and New Zealand near the top in some global catastrophe scenarios. The fear is real, the geography is not imaginary. But a bunker can look like an answer long before it proves it can sustain life. A remote island can look like refuge. A sealed retreat can look like control. What if all of that only solves the first part of the problem? What happens after the door closes? What happens after the door closes? To answer that, we have to go back to the map. In some global catastrophe scenarios, Australia and New Zealand really do look unusually strong. A 2020 risk analysis study ranked Australia first among island refugees, with New Zealand close behind, and later Work Again placed both near the top in some catastrophic scenarios. At first, I did not think the geography mattered. The bunker was the story, the concrete, the steel, the fantasy of sealing yourself away. But the research kept pushing me back toward the map, because once the map starts making sense, the bunker starts looking smarter than it really is. The appeal is easy to understand. Distance starts to look like safety. In elite survivalist imagination, the South begins to feel like the far edge of the system, a place where you could withdraw not just from danger, but from everyone else. But that is also where the problem begins. A bunker only looks complete if we imagine survival as a matter of architecture: the steel door, the concrete shell, the stored food, the sealed air. The trouble starts when time enters the story. There is a real-world version of that problem. In the early 1990s, 8 people were sealed inside Biosphere 2 in Arizona, a closed ecological experiment. It looked controlled, but oxygen levels fell so badly that oxygen had to be added from outside. The closure did not eliminate dependence, it exposed it. That is the bunker problem in miniature. The same studies that make the South look attractive also highlight the weakness in the plan. Under low-trade or no-trade conditions, these sanctuaries still depend on refined liquid fuels and on industrial parts that are hard to replace locally. That was where the bunker changed shape for me. Up to then, it could still look like a final answer: strong walls, stored supplies, clean separation. But once the door closes, the problem is no longer just whether you got inside in time, it is whether the system inside can keep going. The generator still needs fuel, the air system still needs filters, the water system still needs pumps. And systems like that do not fail all at once. They fail one part at a time. A filter clogs, a pump starts failing, a part wears out. And once something breaks, the real question is no longer the wall outside. It is whether you can repair what is failing inside. That is why I kept coming back to what one bunker researcher calls the problem of the 15th day. Not the first dramatic night, but the moment 2 weeks later when fuel is lower, a filter needs changing, a pump starts failing, and a small technical problem is no longer small because there is no easy way to replace what is wearing out. The fear is real. The map matters. But survival is not just a sealed room. It is everything that still has to work after the room is sealed. A bunker does not eliminate dependence. It concentrates it. And once that became clear, a different question opened up. If survival cannot really be compressed into a sealed room, then what carried people through before modern bunkers, industrial fuel systems, and long supply chains? That question sent me back to material I already knew. I had made a video about Australia's prehistoric floods, including traditions about Port Phillip Bay in Victoria, once lived country, now a bay. So the material itself was not new to me. What changed was the way it started to read once the bunker stopped looking like a complete answer. Up to then, I had still been thinking in bunker terms, shelter, walls, sealed systems. But once that logic broke down, a different problem came into view. What happens when the land changes so much that the old map no longer works? In 2016, researchers gathered traditions from 21 locations around the Australian coast. Their argument stopped me. Some stories may preserve memories of coastal inundation from more than 7,000 years ago. That was where it finally clicked for me. Not the fact itself, I already knew it, but what kind of problem it was solving. If land like that disappears, people do not just lose scenery, they lose roots, they lose familiar ground. A path you once trusted is now underwater. That was when I stopped hearing these as old stories that happened to line up with modern research. I started hearing them as a warning. This place changed. The old ground is gone. Do not trust the map you used before. A bunker tries to keep people alive by sealing them off. These traditions solve a different problem. They keep people alive by remembering what changed, where the water came, which land disappeared, which routes no longer worked. But that only helps if the stories stay accurate. That is why the Nicholas Reid point matters. He argues there is a kin-based responsibility for accuracy in Aboriginal storytelling. These traditions were maintained because people depended on them. Then Henbury pushed further. At the Henbury crater field in Central Australia, stories describe a fire devil coming down from the sun, making holes in the earth, and leaving the place so dangerous that people avoided camping or drinking there. What struck me was how practical the memory was. Do not camp here. Do not drink here. This place is dangerous. That was when the flood material stopped looking like an isolated curiosity. It started looking like a way of carrying knowledge through time, knowledge about a changed landscape, and how to move through it without getting hurt. A bunker stores bodies, food, water, and air inside a sealed room. These traditions store something else: orientation, warning, behaviour in a world that has already changed. And once that was on the table, another problem appeared. Even after the flood stories, I realised I was still waiting for the apocalypse, a clean line where the old world ends and the new begins, a rupture you could point to and say, "There, that is where it happened." But this material kept resisting that kind of ending. Even then, I was still waiting for the apocalypse. Even after the flood stories, I was still looking for a clean line, the moment you could point to and say, "That is where the old world ends and the new one begins." Māori material made that harder to hold on to. What changed first was the way the world begins in Māori tradition. It does not begin as an open, settled place. It begins in darkness, with Ranginui and Papatuanuku, Sky Father and Earth Mother, pressed together, and their children trapped between them. Light only appears after they are forced apart. What stayed with me there was not just the imagery. It was the kind of world this suggests. Not a world already open and stable, waiting for disaster to break it, but a world that has to open through separation and change. That mattered because the bunker imagines a different kind of world. It assumes stability first, then rupture. Safety first, then collapse. The Māori material was already pushing me away from that. Then I came to Rūaumoko. In Māori tradition, Rūaumoko is one of the children of Skyfather and Earthmother, associated with earthquakes and volcanic force beneath the earth. That mattered because it changed what underground meant. The bunker imagines underground as refuge, thick walls, stable ground, controlled air, distance from whatever is happening above. But in this story, what lies beneath is not still at all. It is one of the places where the world remains active, where the ground itself can still move. That was the turn for me. The bunker says, go below the surface and escape instability. This material says something much less comforting. Go below the surface, and you may be closer to it. And suddenly the problem with the bunker was no longer just practical, it ran deeper than that. The flood traditions had already pushed me toward a world where landscapes change and people survive by remembering how to move through them. The Māori material pushed further. It suggested a world where change is not just an interruption to life, but part of the way the world works. That was the point where I realised I had not only been thinking about survival in bunker terms, I had also been imagining crisis in bunker terms. Stable first, broken later. Safe here, dangerous there. Before, then after. But this material kept pulling me away from that shape, not by arguing with it, but by making it harder and harder to believe that the world would ever break that cleanly. And that leaves the harder question. If the world does not end all at once, what still carries people through it? By then, the Billionaire Doomsday bunker looked different to me. Not as a joke, and not as pure delusion. The fear behind it is real, and the geography is not imaginary either. Australia and New Zealand really do look unusually strong in some catastrophic risk models. But the bunker itself started to feel smaller than it first appeared. At first it looks enormous, steel door, concrete shell, stored food, sealed air. But the real problem begins after the door closes. The bunker buys time. It does not buy a way to live once that time runs out. Of course, in any real catastrophe, protecting human life comes first. But surviving the first shock is not the same thing as sustaining life after it. A bunker stores bodies, food, water, air. The old stories stored something else. Roots, warnings, memory, behaviour, the knowledge that helps people move through a world that has already changed. I had been thinking about survival as protection. These traditions kept pushing me towards survival as continuity. Not just staying alive through the first shock, but keeping enough knowledge, enough orientation, and enough practical memory alive to go on afterwards. That is why the bunker started to feel incomplete. Not useless, not irrational, just too narrow. The bunker asks, how do I keep danger out? The old stories asked something harder. Once the world has changed, what still helps people move through it? The first step may be smaller than a grand theory of collapse. It may begin when we stop treating the world as inventory, not as something to seal ourselves off from, but as something we are still learning to live inside.